Hello, everyone. Welcome to the course entitled Identifying Hollies in the Landscape. It has been given course number 2162 by the North Carolina Landscape Contractors Licensing Board. Course number 2162, Identifying Hollies in the Landscape, and it is good for one landscape or technical credit for the NCLCLB. Now, this course does not give any credits for the North Carolina Department of Agricultural's pesticide credits or the North Carolina Irrigation Contractors Licensing Board. This is specifically designed for the North Carolina Landscape Contractors Licensing Board. Now, with this course, it is 4 different segments from 4 different lectures that I've put together for the college that I teach at. So we are going to see a lecture on the first 8 plants that are a part of this lecture. So we're going to discuss hollies. We're going to talk about the hollies that are the most common in the landscape and some of my personal favorites that I wish were used more so in the landscape. So you're going to watch a lecture on the first 8, and then you're going to jump into another miniature lecture on the last 4. So we are going to study 12 hollies in total. And after we see the lecture with the PowerPoint slide, we're going to see me actually holding up samples just like this of the different hollies. And all 4 of these lectures, the 2 main lectures with PowerPoints and the 2 videos of me holding up the plant samples were recorded on different days. And so that's why I may look a little different, or I may have on a different shirt. But that was good information that I wanted to use, and I wanted it to be a part of this lecture. Now, throughout the lecture, you need to pay close attention not only to the information that I'm talking about the particular hollies, but also just notice maybe what I'm wearing, where I'm at, because the licensing board wants me to do a better job of tracking whether or not you guys are watching the lectures. And so I hate being a school teacher per se when it comes to attendance, because a lot of this information you guys already know. It is, and I appreciate you being a customer of Turf Teacher and taking these online courses. So I may ask 2 or 3 questions that really do not pertain to the hollies, but they pertain to the video. So it's what we call check on learnings. And so you'll see it in the actual quiz at the very end that'll ask you, maybe what color shirt was Eric wearing in the 4th mini segment or something like that. So, but anyway, guys, thank you so much. There will be a quiz at the end of this lecture, and let's go ahead and get started. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we have the Ilex Cornuta Carissa, your Carissa Chinese Holly. We have your Ilex Cornuta Burford Nana, your Dwarf Burford Chinese Holly, the most used plant in commercial landscape installation today. Ilex Glabra, your Inkberry Holly, your Ilex Creneta Helleri, your Helleri Holly, your Ilex Creneta Sky Pencil Japanese Holly, your Ilex Creneta Soft Touch, your Soft Touch Japanese Holly, your Ilex Vomitoria Pendula, your Weeping Yopon Holly, and then your Ilex Vomitoria Nana, your Dwarf Yopon Holly. Now, the one thing that I want you to notice is we have a lot of Chinese and Japanese hollies. The main difference between those 2 plants is that the Chinese holly hurt when touched. If you rub your hand across of them, you're going to feel the stickers on them, the pricklers. They may even leave a little bit of a red bump on your finger if they prick you hard enough. And then your Japanese hollies are going to be real soft. And when I mean soft, they don't have pricklers on them, because the Helleri holly, which is Japanese, you can tell the difference between Japanese and Chinese. Cornuta is Chinese, Crenada is Japanese, but the Helleri Holly is kind of rough and sticky and woody, but the actual foliage is soft. It does not have any pricklers on it. And then a lot of your Chinese hollies have the red berries, whereas a lot of your Crenadas will have the black berries as their fruit. So let's go ahead and get started with this lecture. Ilex Cornuta Carissa, your Carissa Chinese holly, still used a lot in commercial landscape and not as much as the Dwarf Burford, but it is a plant that is used in foundations of commercial buildings, fast food restaurants, gas stations, in the parking lots of your supermarkets. They're just a good tree to have in the parking lot. The problem is they like to collect trash. Guaranteed, any Carissa holly that you walk up to, you can find either a potato chip bag, McDonald's cup, a Hardee's bag, whatever it is, people's lunches. They seem to get down in it and find their way there. The easiest way to identify this plant is with the yellow margin around the leaf. You got that distinct yellow margin, and that's going to identify it as a Carissa holly. Here they planted in a row along a driveway. Now, this is a good way to do it. They don't need any pruning. Please do not use a hedge clipper on them. If they need pruning, you need to go in with a pair of loppers if they get too tall like this. But they're slow growers. They're not going to overpower the parking lot or anything like that. They may need only pruning every 2 to 3 years if you have a maintenance contract. More samples of it. They are susceptible to disease and everything, but a good little drawing of the plant there. That's something that you could actually, screenshot and put on your plant sheets that you're working out. And you can actually search for that line art of those plants on the internet. It does have a mounding form if grown alone. It will mass together. These plants are good for massing, just like the Helleri hollies that we'll see. But the one thing I want you to notice about this, even though it is a Cornuta, meaning Chinese holly, it is very soft to touch in the spring. That new foliage is so soft and it feels so good. It will still have that little needle point at the end, but it is very soft to the touch. But once it gets mature, it is very difficult to touch. And when you're pruning them, you probably need to have a pair of gloves on, because we will prune this plant by hand. This is the plant that will revert back to the Ilex Cornuta. This is your Ilex Cornuta mom and dad plant. This is where they all originated. And the Carissa holly is a cultivar of it, so it will revert back to the parent plant. You could actually walk up to, I'd say, half of the Carissa hollies that you see in the world, and somewhere or another on the plant, you will see it reverting back to the parent plant. And what you have to do as a horticulturalist professional is to prune out the mom and dad or the parent plant and keep the natural looking foliage of the Carissa holly. Let's move into the Ilex Cornuta Burfordi Nana, your Dwarf Burford holly, the most common used plant in commercial landscape installation to date. It is overused, heavily used, but it is still one heck of a plant. It's hardy, ain't nothing going to kill it. It's just a tough plant, and that's why it's used in commercial landscaping. It's used in parking lots. It is used on corner foundations of some residential properties, but they can get huge. This is the Burfordi Nana. There is also the Burfordi holly, which mainly the difference is the height that the plant is going to grow. But the nanas still get super big themselves. People shear these to death. It is one of the plants that will develop that, 1 inch of outside of foliage that will start to die out within once you keep shearing it every year. But it responds really well to a hard cutback. So if they get overgrown and you have to go in and do a landscape renovation by, cutting back the plant material real hard, they respond really well to it. And this is a plant that responds well to growth retardants. You could actually prune it, and when you start seeing that new light green foliage hit it, you could hit it with a pesticide, or it is a pesticide, but it is a growth retardant, something like Atramac, which will prevent you from having to prune it the rest of the year. So it does respond well to growth retardants, which could reduce your labor burden on your maintenance properties. Grown in a hedge format along foundations of residentials and commercials, but heavily used in commercial landscape installation. It is grown for the red berries that it has. Most of your Chinese hollies will have the red berries. Ilex Glabra, your Inkberry Holly. Here you have the black berries on it, which was used by Native Americans for like ink. They could, crush it up and actually write with it. It does have a very inconspicuous bloom, white little flower that you can see when it does bloom, but it's not grown for that. Doesn't really have that good of a smell. I mean, all flowers really, have a fragrance to them. You just can't really smell it. But this plant is mainly grown for screening. People will do it as tree form, which is okay. When you plant a shrub and you prune it to tree form, that's called planted on standard. And you can buy these plants already, B&B, meaning ball and burlapped, versus container plants already tree formed, and they'll call them on standard. Here's one, just got from the nursery. Very fast grower. The problem with these plants, you'll start seeing them get a little leggy at the bottom. That's okay. Here, they've been taken good care of. They've been fertilized. It's a very healthy specimen right here. So I'm really impressed with this landscape having these Inkberry Hollies, because most of them are going to start looking like this, leggy at the bottom. That's why people will go ahead and prune these on standard, because they will make a nice tree form. It just takes a little bit longer to get there versus something like the Dwarf Burford. A lot of Dwarf Burfords are planted on standards. You can actually buy them from the nurseries on standard in that B&B format. And here we have one up against, a foundation of the house. You can start seeing it get a little leggy and a little thin at the bottom. It's just typical of the Inkberry Holly. Now, one of my favorite plants of all time, one of the very first plants that I learned how to prune from my mom and my aunt, is your Ilex Creneta Helleri. Now, this holly does not respond at all to shears. If you hedge clip this, it is going to kill it straight up. You have to prune this plant by hand, because its native look is to be kind of almost like a spiked haircut, almost kind of like the mullet, right? Which is coming back in style, by the way. But you want that little spike on these plants. They just kind of look good, natural like that. And as you can see, the plant here is kind of grown out a little bit, and it's kind of spiky, but that's the way it needs to be. You take those hedge clippers, it's going to ruin it, and this plant will start dying out, and we'll show a picture of that here in a little bit. But again, the new foliage is that light green. Here they're planted in a massing, which when these guys grow together, they look really, really well. You will see like a pinkish color to the interior of these Helleris. But this, like I said, is a plant that when you touch it and you feel it, it's going to feel woody. It's going to feel stemmy versus prickly or very soft. It's just going to feel like sticks when you touch it. Here is a plant that's been susceptible to the shearing. You can't do it. It's going to start dying back when that happens. And when you cut these guys back, they just don't respond like some of the Burford hollies and the other Chinese hollies. You need to kind of let them go. And here is a good sample of what the foliage should look like when taken care of properly. Your Ilex Crenata Sky Pencil, boom, guys. Easiest way to identify it, it's the only plant that looks like a pencil. Very skinny and tall. Grown in containers a lot with annuals at the bottom, planted at the entryways to a home or a commercial building, or going up a set of steps. They just look really well doing that, even though here we got one by itself. But I love them in the containers. Eventually, yes, you will have to pop it out of the container and pop it into the landscape. Here is a typical upright form growing up against the brick wall here. And then here they're screening out a HVAC HVAC unit, which it's good for that. It does allow for air to move through it, especially if you don't plant them nearly all together. And they're going to continue to grow upright versus in width. So it's still going to allow some airflow back to that unit. Still, I guarantee you, your HVAC contractor, when they show up to the house, they will cut those down to the ground. So I would recommend not doing that. The upright foliage, it is going to grow strictly up. Here is, used in screening where they were planted side by side on double rows. So there is another row behind it, and that's okay. It just gets a little wild and untamed looking for that. I'd much rather use a different plant, but some people will use it. I would go more for the Dwarf Burfords or the Burford Hollies, or even a Nellie Stevens that we will see next week. Your Ilex Creneta Soft Touch is being used quite a bit more now in foundation plantings. It is replacing the Ilex Vomitora Nana because this plant's a little more cold hardy. We've planted a bunch of Ilex Vomitora Nanas in our business, but we've had to go back and replace them. And one of the plants that we use is the Soft Touch Holly, and its name is very descriptive of the plant. Soft to the touch. It is a wonderful, wonderful plant. Here you can see it native in the landscape. It does get a little bit of height to it over the years. Very roundish and very tight in form when picked up from the nursery, but a very good specimen plant right here. One of the plants to use in smaller spaces. Your Ilex Vomitoria pendula. This is your weeping Yopon Holly, and it can get tree form. It can get very huge if you let it. We have one on the hill there at campus. You'll see that in the location video, but it's real cool with its drooping leaves or the drooping limbs. They like hanging down, and it's just awesome, especially when it's full of those berries right there. And then, it kind of looks a little Halloweenish to me, just kind of the way the limbs kind of hang on. It's almost like a, ghost, during the Halloween season. So, but a good tree. They just don't like the cold, just like the nanas. But man, look at those red berries. And then it is a very distinctive leaf. So when you take a sample of these plants, make sure that you can find a leaf for it. And then here is your Ilex Vomitora Nana. These are the plants that will die if we have a hard freeze. Very similar to the Helleri Holly, but I want you to compare and touch these leaves when you take a sample. They're going to have more of a gray stem inside of it. It's almost like a light gray, or almost like a lightish gray blue, which is very distinguished and separate from the Helleri Holly. Used a lot, like at Disney, in the topiary. I've had several students that have actually got to go down to Disney and do an internship. Well, not personal students, not students from my class, but I've known students to go down there, several of them, to work and do this type of gardening. But they are very accepted in the topiary world because they just keep that form in nature. They are used in mass plantings. I don't like seeing those pine needles fall in it though, because those will damage the plants as they get older. And then, not my favorite as a clipped hedge. Do not do this. Just don't, guys. And you're going to hear me say this over and over again. Learn to hand prune. Throw the hedge clippers away. You can make $80 to $120 an hour hand pruning and doing it right and marketing yourself as a true horticulturalist and knowing how to prune by hand the correct way. This just destroys it. Start seeing the dead right there. Start seeing the holes. It's going to kill it. It's going to kill it. But a good close-up of the foliage there. Again, very similar to the pendula. So take the samples. You would see the Nana is going to have a smaller leaf versus the actual pendula. All right. So, guys, we've just seen plants 1 through 8, and now I want to give you plants 9 through 12. So we do have a total of 12 hollies that are a part of course number 2162, Identifying Hollies in the Landscape. And so plant number 9 is your Ilex Opaka, your American Holly, one of my favorites that's not used that much anymore in the landscape, just like number 12, our Savannah Holly. These are two of the hollies that I think we should have more in the landscape, more in our arsenal when it comes to landscape design and when it comes to just using these gorgeous plants. Everybody's stuck on the Nellie Stevens, the Foster Holly. Now everybody's into the arborvitaes, but you know, these two plants right here need to be used more often. And we're going to jump into the lecture that we did for a plant group at the college. So you'll see the slide decks for these plants, and then we will actually see the samples of me holding them up. So number 9 is Ilex Opaka, the American Holly. Number 10 is your Ilex X Nellie R. Stevens, your Nellie R. Stevens Holly. Again, that and the Dwarf Burford are probably the most common used plants in commercial landscaping. We have our Ilex X Attenuata Fosteri, your Foster's Holly, your Foster Holly, or your Fosteri Holly. And, you know, sorry that I'm chopping up the words, but Ilex X Attenuata Fosteri is how I say it. That's how I learned to say it in college down at A&T. And then we have plant number 12, your Ilex X Attenuata Savannah, or your Savannah Holly. But number 9 and number 12, guys, I feel should be used more often in the landscape, and leave 10 and 11 out a few times. I know, you know, 11 isn't used that much in commercial landscaping. It's used more or less as corner foundation plantings in residential design and installation. But let's try to bring back some of these hollies, and let's go ahead and jump into the lecture that I recorded at the college, and we'll see plants 9 through 12. Here we have the Ilex Opaka, the true American holly, native to our woods here in North Carolina. If you were to walk out into the woods and you were to see a holly growing, it is going to be the American holly. I could go out on our farm and probably find one in the woods right now. The one that I'm going to show you on campus, if they haven't removed it, is, you know, planted by a bird. It's near the Akubas by the maintenance shed. They're on the main drag, Oak Grove Road, but I'll show you in the video. It's kind of hidden. You'll have to dig for it, but it has these leaves that almost, I mean, guys, to be honest with you, it reminds me like a tick, you know, with all the little legs coming off of it. It looks almost like a bug, the leaf, but it's beautiful. It can get leggy and tall. Not so good with shearing just because of the leaf. But if you wanted them more tight and compact, you would have to shear them. They will get leggy and open like that. And that's why they're used in conjunction with a lot of other hollies if they're going to be used for screening. You'd want to throw some Nellie Stevens in there, some Dwarf Burfords, or either some other evergreen, you know, Fraser firs, Colorado blue spruce. You know, that would actually be a great combination, the American holly with the blue Colorado spruce. Just because of the difference in the color of the leaf, but can get kind of wild looking. And then there again, you know, full of red berries. It is a very pale looking green. It's not very dark and lustrous like the Nellie Stevens, but natural form. A lot of people will tree form them or let them come on down to the ground. Beautiful tree for Christmas lights if you're into that. Here's one a little more shinier than usual, but usually they're more faded in the landscape, but, you know, nice looking berries, nice fruit. And here what I meant by unkempt, it's just they get kind of wild and leggy, and they need to go in there and we need to go in there with some loppers and kind of cut this plant up a little bit. But here we have, you know, the foliage in the form. This is what it should look like on your postcard. Your Ilex X Nellie R. Stevens. And yes, Mr. Stevens, he, sorry about that, named it after his wife when he propagated this plant, but used extensively in screening, the actual perfect screening plant. To be honest with you, it replaced the Leland cypress several years ago, but very dense, very coarse. This is a plant that you could not walk through if you planted these side by side. It is a barrier. Nobody's going to get through it because of the stickers on it. If you know where the front entrance is to Wake Forest, there at Wake Forest Road and Renewal Road, if you see the brick columns going into main campus on Wake Forest, our company, we planted those several years ago, late 70s, to be honest with you. Maybe mid 80s. We've done so much work for Wake Forest over the years. It's kind of hard to keep up with when all this was done. And I was a little fellow when that happened, but I remember my dad doing these jobs. But they dug a trench behind those walls with a backhoe or with the claw handle that comes out. They dug a big old trench and they planted those Nellie Stevens root ball to root ball, the B and B, planted them side by side. And now they've got that huge wall of green behind those brick columns. It's actually beautiful. And they actually do shear these once a year. They get a bucket truck in there with the shears and they keep them that shape that they want. These Nellie Stevens, they do have white blooms, very inconspicuous, but you can see them when they do bloom, not fragrant at all, but they are full of red berries. So people love them this time, a month ago for Christmas, just based on the red berries that they do have. Close up of the foliage. Again, you'll need to have this side by side with like your Foster Holly, your American Holly, your Burford Holly. The easiest way to do it's with those note cards that we did yesterday. But shrub form, that is a typical site. A lot of people will actually shear that right there. I prefer not to, but when it gets to that height, you're probably going to have to start shearing it. Here, they have used it as a screen up against that. When those eventually grow together, nobody's going to want to crawl through that. But, here we get all the topiary boxwood. So it is fitting to actually shear them right here. Here is one at the mature height when it is sheared. But guys, let me tell you something. This is the perfect tree to do lights on at Christmas, whether mini lights or the big bulbs, the C9 or C7 bulbs. It's just easy to canopy wrap these trees. But this one has been sheared, and that's okay. It's in a commercial landscaping. If they didn't start doing it, eventually all this would start growing over the curb and gutter and would be into the drive into the commercial property. Here we have your Ilex X Attenuate Fosteri, your Foster Holly, probably more useful at Christmas time with its red berries than the Nellie Stevens. But a very small, slender leaf, as you can see right here. We do have them on campus, and we'll show you in the video where the location is, but you'd want to get a sample of that. All of these hollies you need to have side by side on these postcards so you know exactly what they look like. Very inconspicuous bloom. You're not really going to see it. It's more predominant on the Nellie Stevens than it is with this plant. But there's a good close-up of the leaf. It will scratch your hand a bit when you're pruning it, but not as rough as some of the other ones. Here we have the whole plant. It is used in a lot of commercial settings, especially on the corners of the buildings, and that's where they are in the Almond Center. But these plants are used typically a lot in residential landscaping as corner foundation plants. The problem is they start to get too big. They start to get huge, and they will get leggy up top. A lot of this has to do with sunlight. They need more sun. When they're planted in the shade, they will get a little more leggy, but this is from not pruning. I don't like having those two laterals right there. I'd rather have one central leader, but you just needed to been pruned a little bit more as a juvenile plant versus, full maturity height. There's the foliage and the berries again. Here is your Ilex Attenuate Savannah Holly. one of my favorite plants, but we don't use them enough here in North Carolina, and I don't really understand why. Here you have the foliage, some green foliage, but it's going to be more yellowish or yellowish green than this picture right here states. Just because of the nature, and I guess where people plant them. The only time I've ever seen them is in the parking lots. If you know where the old Toys R Us was in Winston-Salem, now it's like a Burlington coat factory, I think, but they have Savannah Hollies planted in the parking lot, and I'll show you that in the location video. But as you can see here, it does have more of a yellowing tint to the leaf versus the Foster Holly or definitely the Nellie Stevens. A little bit smoother and less prickly than the other plants. Like here, you can see some that don't have any. So you just want to get some good samples of this holly plant when you're able to do it. So hopefully, if you have time, drive out to the mall the weekend or whatever, stop by the Burlington Coat Factory parking lot and take a sample. Here is the tall grown specimens, and from a distance this looks a lot like Foster Holly. I'm not gonna lie, but it's has more of a central leader versus the Foster, but used primarily in the South. You're not going to see it up north much. It does have the red berries. Here they've got it tree formed. Here they have one on the corner of the house. A little too close to the house for my comfort. I would have pulled it back a little bit, but of course with the sidewalk and the driveway, that was a little bit hard to do. There's a robin feasting on the berries in the wintertime. Typical form with branches near the ground, if not pruned. People are more or less leave it like that than tree forming it. But like I said, has its purposes. I wish we would use them more here in North Carolina, but we just don't. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now we're actually going to jump into what I call the plant samples video. I do this for my students on campus for Plant Materials 1, Plant Materials 2, and Advanced Plant Materials. It's when I go around and I actually take the plant samples and then I bring them back here to the studio, and I actually just hold them up just like this. We're using a pen here, but I would hold up the leaf sample and I talk about it. And so we're going to see it for plants 1 through 8. And then we're going to jump in to another plant samples video that was recorded on different days, because you got to understand this group of plants were talked about on 2 different classes on campus. We did 1 through 8, which I entitled it Plant Group 2 for the spring semester. And then we jumped into the following week with the 4 remaining hollies, but they were actually plants. They were actually plants 4, 5, 6, and 7 instead of actually, 9, 10, 11, and 12, which they should be, based on this lecture. So if you hear me talking about numbers of plants, don't worry about that. Just pay attention to the actual samples. And you'll see where I actually had some note cards that I actually take the samples and will pull a leaf off of each shrub or tree, and I will, flatten it, stick it in my book, flatten it, and then tape it down to a postcard. And that way I've got good samples that I can always refer to. So I love doing that. And this is a good way to study your plants and a good way to, prep yourself for the North Carolina Certified Plant Professional exam if you're interested in taking that. So let's jump into these 2 different plant sample lectures. And remember, there may be some check on learning questions in the quiz. So here is plant number 1. This is your Ilex Cornuta Carissa, or your Carissa Chinese Holly. Now, pay close attention to this. This is the plant, as you've seen in the plant lecture, that has the yellow margin. You have the yellow margin. And so basically when you take one of these samples to actually study, you just pull a leaf off and you have your plant sample. Now, this one's a little bit bigger than the one I put here on my note card. But you can see definitely the yellow margin and know that it is a Chinese holly based on the sticker. When you can almost sew a rip in your jeans with that prickler right there, or that thorn. So, but that is your Carissa holly, used in commercial landscaping. It is a catch-all plant. It's going to collect trash. It's going to collect pine needles and leaves, anything that drops. But it is a plant that doesn't need that much maintenance, doesn't need that much pruning, and very suitable for industrial, commercial, and even college campuses. You'll see these planted quite a bit, and in parking lots on the islands, in asphalt city. And so our next one is your Burford Holly. This is your Ilex Cornuta Burford Nana. This is your Dwarf Burford Holly. And basically, I went and cut a sample off of it. And so to put on your note cards or your worksheets, just pull one off. This plant is used extremely a lot in commercial landscape installation jobs. Probably the #1 plant used for commercial landscaping. I can't tell you the thousands of these that I have planted personally, just based with the number of commercial jobs that we've done in our landscape business. But this is the Dwarf Burford Holly. As you can see, the leaves are almost like puffy. They've got like a rib to it on top. It's not smooth and flat, and it does have that thorn. And this plant is sheared a lot because it's used in hedges, around parking lots, in any type of screening. But the one reason that this plant is used quite a bit in commercial landscaping is because you can buy a 3-gallon plant that's going to meet the 36-inch requirement. They're going to be, close to 36 inches wide, maybe even, 36 inches tall, or smaller, but they are going to pass for that 3-foot shrub that a lot of municipalities call for. They're going to be root bound in a 3-gallon at that size, but they grow fast and they're readily available for commercial landscape installation jobs. Next is your Ilex Glabra, your Inkberry Holly, very smooth to the touch, one of your bigger, softer leaves. This does have a black berry on it. Reminds me quite a bit of a wax myrtle, but you can do them on standard, as you've seen on the lecture, that they get very leggy at the bottom. But a beautiful plant nonetheless. It is soft. You can use the actual blackberries to make ink. Native Americans used to do that. They could actually write with that berry. So a nice plant, but it is your Inkberry Holly. And again, you just pull one off, stick on your plant list, or put on your note cards, and you've got a good sample of the Inkberry. Alex Creneta Helleri is plant number 4, and I got 2 different samples. Guys, here is some of your older foliage on it, and this plant, if you rub across of it, it just feels woody, it feels stemmy. It just feels like twigs, and it's the leaves are super smooth, but it's the wood-like structure on the plant that just gives it that coarse feel. Now, the second sample I got off of it was the newer growth that shot up off of it. This is on top of the plant, so if you go into the parking lot of where the horticulture area is on Forsyth Tech, you'll be able to see this new growth on top. But I went ahead and got 2 samples. I would pull one of the little ones to put on the postcard and have on your plant list. But, guys, when you are studying for these exams, the best thing to do is to actually keep these. If you wanted to put these in a Ziploc bag and actually keep them like in your fridge or your freezer, they're going to do just fine. You can pull them out, study them, put them back. But the best way to do it is to pull these leaves off and actually flatten them in your tree book because it's very heavy. You could pull one of the leaves off, stick it in the book, close it on top of it, and it'll flatten these guys really, really well. So that way you can put them on the note cards. And what I did is just got some of the packaging tape and actually taped them to the note cards. So that is your Helleri Holly. Next is your Sky Pencil. And as you can see, pruning a sample of this off, it's automatically going to rise. It is Sky Pencil. It is shooting for the stars, as you might want to say, or the sky. But the coolest thing about it, we've still got some of the black berries on it. Very, very cool. The specimen that we have on campus is kind of bad on the backside, but it's just, you know, it's in one of those areas that is getting ready to be demolished because of the new greenway that's going there, the new green space. So I would love to be able to go in there and prune that back and move it over to where our classrooms are. But this is your Sky Pencil. Like I said, they're planted on either side of a step. They're planted going into an entryway into a commercial building or someone's home. It is used as screening around air conditioning units, even alongside of a wooden fence, just to kind of break up the wood part of it. But a very nice plant. And I just love the fact that, you know, you can bend it back or whatever, it's going to shoot for the stars. But your Sky Pencil Holly. Soft Touch. And where did that little individual go? Just had it. Here we go. Here is your Soft Touch Holly. Like I said, very soft to the touch. It's not going to hurt at all. It is more of an oblong leaf for your hollies. So if you had to pull one off, you can see that it's kind of thinner than your Helleri Hollies or even your Ilex Creneta compacta that you saw last week. But a very nice plant. Soft Touch is being used a lot more now. That and the Hugendorf Holly, which you can see the Hugendorf Holly in the same bed that's got the Soft Touch. It's right beside the Helleri Holly. But these Soft Touch are used now more so around like water gardens, around fountains, kind of an ornamental look or more of a formal garden design. They're used in kind of in place of boxwoods. But what they have done is replace the ink, not the inkberry, but our Dwarf Yopon Hollies. We used to plant a ton of Dwarf Yopon Hollies, and they are very susceptible to our cold weather here in North Carolina. We do have some strong winters that can get cold, but then again, we may have a very mild winter. But when we have a cold winter, it will zap some of the Yopon Holly, so a lot of people are going back with the Soft Touch Hollies. Next is your Ilex Vomitoria Pendula, your Weeping Yopon Holly. And actually, it was hanging down like this, and I actually pruned it. And I've got two samples here because you will see the little berries that are still on this one right here. Both of the Weeping Yopon Hollies on campus still have red berries. We've got one on the bank that I've showed you. And then if you're going over to Snyder Hall from our building, you'll see one planted right there on the corner by the welding shop. But they hang down. They're going to droop down. They almost, like I said in the lecture, almost kind of like the Halloween tree or shrub, just because they've got that almost that ghost look with them hanging down. But beautiful red berries on these plants when they are in full blast. And you can still see some on the ones at campus, but that is your Weeping Yopon Holly. It looks very similar, guys, to the Dwarf Yopon Holly. But the one thing I want you to notice about both of these is the light gray stem right here on the plants. It's a almost like charcoal. You know, when you burn a grill, like that grayish white ash look, but very, very predominant of the Yopon Hollies. I'm not going to trick you guys up on the exam when it comes to these Yopon Hollies. I will show you a picture either of it, you know, weeping down or in the dwarf size. Now, in the location video, you saw a large Dwarf Yopon Holly. They do get big. You know, over time, that one's been planted there probably 20 plus years, I would say. So it has gotten pretty large there beside the steps. It's right beside your Sky Pencil. But this is your Weeping Yopon Holly, and this is your Dwarf Yopon Holly. So, guys, that is your plant materials for Group 2. I highly recommend going and getting samples of your plants and then coming back and actually doing some type of note card like this for easy study, but then filling out those plant sheets that you can download off of Blackboard. So guys, that does wrap up Plant Group 2. I appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Your Ilex Opaka, took this sample off campus near the maintenance building. Remember, this is the one, almost looks like a tick. So you'd want to pull a plant sample off for this one. Nice looking, almost looks like a, some type of bug that we would see. Like I said, a tick, spider mite or whatever. I mean, just looks like an insect. All of those pricklers. This plant hurts when you have to prune it. But if you saw the one in the lecture in the Burlington Coat Factory parking lot, no, sorry, that's the Savannah. These are the ones by the maintenance building as well. This is what grows native in our woods, but nice little pricklies on it. Nellie R. Stevens. Nice little sample here. These are some juvenile leaves on it, especially the ones that have a smooth margin around it. The older ones will develop the pricklers on it, but a very, very tough plant to prune. And I've got one here that's got the red berries. But a nice little good sample of a Nellie Stevens. Very dark and puffy on the leaf sample. Very rubbery feeling, very hard to tear. We'll have some white blooms on it here very shortly. Very inconspicuous, but you will be able to see it and notice it. And then it does have the red berries. That is your Nellie R. Stevens. Your Foster Holly, plant number 8. A little bit darker, greener than the Savannah, but the smallest holly leaf that you'll see this week. Very tiny and still full of red berries. People love this at Christmas time to put on, fireplace mantles. They make wreaths out of them. Just a really good ornamental plant when it comes to the holiday decorating season. That is your Foster Holly. And I keep mentioning this Savannah Holly. This is the one that is out near Burlington Coat Factory on Silas Creek, guys. Very light colored leaf, smooth, doesn't hurt at all to touch, but it is very woody. Has a wood stem. Does have the smaller red berries, the smaller of any of our plants that we've seen this week. But you'd want to pull a sample like that and put on your postcard or on your actual plant sheets that are available on Blackboard. But a very distinctive, smooth margin holly. It is your Savannah Holly. Ilex X Attenuate Savannah.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, that does conclude course number 2162, Identifying Hollies in the Landscape. There will be a quiz. So you've watched the lecture now, and you'll see when you log back into the classroom, the Moodle classroom, you'll see the quiz just below it, and it'll be a 10-question quiz. It could be multiple choice, true, false, but there will be check on learnings that will not necessarily have to do with any of the plant materials that are on here. It's just a check on learning to make sure that you had watched the video through it. So I appreciate it, guys. It means the world to me, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Turf Teacher out.